Nat Cohan is an environmental economist who's the president of the Center for Climate and Energy Solutions. He was a professor at Yale University in New Haven and has testified before various committees of the U.S. House of Representatives. During the Obama administration, he was special assistant to the president for energy and the environment. Today, he will describe how capitalism helped create the climate crisis. Can capitalism help solve it too? Please welcome Nat Cohan.
It's the most powerful economic force we know, and it is ravaging our planet. The pursuit of profit that is the heart of capitalism is causing endless traffic, smoggy cities, coal-fired power plants spewing pollution into the air. It's causing oil rigs off coasts, sea level rising, floods, drought, forest fires, heat, species extinction. In short, climate catastrophe. But wait a minute. Socialism also ravaged the planet. And we know that capitalism, the same pursuit of capitalism, the pursuit of profit that's the hallmark of capitalism, has also brought connection and built cities and driven the creation of amazing technologies. So the problem isn't capitalism per se. Capitalism is simply an economic system characterized by private ownership of capital and a market economy. It doesn't have a moral code. It is just the thirst for profit. What we get out of it depends on how we guide it. So today, I want to give you a talk about how we can harness capitalism to help solve climate change. Now, the power of capitalism comes from letting individuals make their own decisions about what to invest, what to produce, what to buy. That makes it an incredible driver of investment and innovation. And we need investment and innovation if we're going to solve the climate crisis. Trillions of dollars of investment into building clean energy and transitioning away from oil and gas and fossil fuels, into money and investment into sustainable agriculture and tropical forest protection. That amount of investment will never come from public coffers alone. We need private sector capital. Public finance can move billions, but only the private sector can move trillions. We also need innovation, cleaner ways of producing energy, new ways of making steel and cement and jet fuel that don't create greenhouse gas emissions, cheaper ways of storing energy so we have it when we need it. And that innovation also needs to be driven by the private sector. And the private sector responds to incentives and to profit. The question is not whether we get rid of capitalism. The question is how we can harness the power of the market to help solve climate change. We need to leverage that pursuit of profit to save the planet rather than destroy it. We need to change the rules of the game to align human nature with Mother Nature. So how do we do that? Well, let me tell you a story. 300 years ago, Britain faced a critical technological challenge: how to measure longitude at sea, which was crucial to an empire founded on naval power. Parliament offered a prize of up to £20,000, about $3 million in today's money, to anyone who could find a solution. The greatest minds of the time thought that the answer would lie in creating enormous star charts, and they set about doing that at the Royal Observatory in Greenwich. But the main solution turned out to come from a self-educated carpenter and clockmaker named John Harrison, who built a clock so finely tuned and well-designed that it could keep time despite the pitch and yaw of the open ocean and the humidity of the tropics. This is a picture of the clock he built. And with such a clock, mariners would always know the time back in Greenwich, when it was noon at their location, and they could use that difference to figure out their longitude. This humble clock, rather than the massive star charts of the experts, turned out to win the prize, revolutionize sea travel, and help propel the British Navy to global dominance. Now, there are many other examples. Here's one for this audience. In 2007, as part of a series of centennial challenges, NASA announced a $200,000 prize to help design a better glove for its spacesuits. The winner was Peter Homer, a software engineer in Maine who stitched together this glove on his kitchen table and ultimately turned it into the design used by SpaceX astronauts. So what does this have to do with solving climate change? Well, the crucial lesson of those prizes is that if you want innovation, you need to take decisions out of the hands of the experts and central planners and move them into the hands of individuals. Individuals working at their kitchen tables or like John Harrison in a clockmaking shop. Capitalism works like a prize on a global scale. It puts decisions into the hands of individual investors or individual innovators backed by individual investors. It decentralizes decision-making and taps into the wisdom of the crowds. And in capitalism, the prize is profit. So if we're going to develop the clean energy technologies we need to get to net zero emissions, we need to make them profitable. Now, we're already starting to see some investments take place. Thanks to rapid declines in cost, wind and solar power are now cost competitive with fossil fuels in much of the world. In fact, the International Energy Agency estimates that last year, global investment in clean energy was 70% greater than investment in fossil fuels. We're also seeing massive investment in new technologies we'll need to get to net zero, like grid-scale batteries and long-duration energy storage, nuclear fusion. The companies developing these technologies and the investors putting money into them are betting on a low-carbon future and trying to get ahead of the curve. But to really supercharge that innovation, we need stronger incentives. We need to align higher profits with lower carbon. Now, profit is just price times quantity. So to align profits, we need to make sure that carbon pollution has a price. So what's the price of carbon pollution? Well, the true price of pollution for society is the cost we inflict on the planet or future generations when we burn fossil fuels to produce steel or cement or chemicals or fertilizer, when we heat our homes and buildings, when we cut down forests for agriculture, when we use electricity generated by fossil fuels, or we drive a gas-powered car, or we fly in an airplane. All of those things generate greenhouse gases, and they generate a cost for society. Now, the average European generates about 7 tons of greenhouse gas emissions every year. The average American, I'm an American, generates about over twice that. This is what a ton of CO2 looks like, or at least gives you a sense of the size if you fill that balloon with CO2. So what does that mean in practice? Well, I flew here from New York City. A round-trip economy class ticket from JFK to Vienna produces about 1 ton of CO2. 1 ton is also about the emissions produced from driving an average gas-powered car, about 2,500 miles or 4,000 kilometers. It's equivalent to the emissions an average US household produces from electricity use in about 10 weeks. So what's the true price of all those emissions? Well, economists call that number the social cost of carbon. It represents all the future damages from emitting 1 ton of CO2. Now, estimates vary, both because of different assumptions and because much is uncertain about the future trajectory of the economy and the climate. But the best estimate of the social cost of carbon is $185 per ton. It could be much greater than that, but $185 is still a lot of money. Global greenhouse gas emissions are around 55 billion tons per year. So if you multiply that number by 185, you get more than $10 trillion of damages from climate pollution globally every year. But in much of the world, including in most of the United States, where I'm from, the price is zero. And when the market price doesn't reflect the actual price of society, economists say there is a market failure. And climate change is the largest market failure the world has ever seen. But the way to address a massive market failure like climate change is not to abandon the market, it's to fix the market. Market actors respond to incentives like iron filings in a magnetic field. The missing price on carbon means that the incentives are all wrong. But a price on carbon would act much like that magnetic field, aligning the economy in the direction of lower carbon and greater sustainability. Now, charging everybody a price of $185 a ton of CO2 is, in most parts of the world, including where I'm from, massively challenging from a political point of view. But even if we don't levy the full price, some price is still better than nothing. And there are a range of ways to put a price on carbon. The simplest way, the most direct way, is a carbon tax. Several countries in Europe, including in Scandinavia, UK, Switzerland, and a few others, have already put a carbon tax on their emissions. So have other countries like Colombia and Singapore. A second way of putting a price on carbon, at least in an indirect way, is through subsidies for clean energy. They perform a little bit like a price on carbon in reverse, with the government paying for clean energy rather than charging for dirty energy. And the Inflation Reduction Act in the United States that was passed a couple of years ago took this approach, providing tens, hundreds of billions of dollars in subsidies for zero carbon electricity, electric vehicles, sustainable aviation fuel, hydrogen, and so on. That approach tends to be easier than charging a fee politically, since it's easier to hand out money than to take it. But it also depends on having a lot of money to spend. A third way to put a price on carbon, and my favorite, is to create a new market. So let me tell you another story. Back in the 1980s, one of the top environmental problems in the United States was acid rain. Sulfur dioxide pollution from power plants in the Midwest was being transported up to New Hampshire and New England and Canada, and coming down as acid rain. It made water toxic to fish and soils toxic to forests. And while we didn't know it yet, that same sulfur pollution was killing people too, causing cardiovascular and lung disease. Traditional command and control regulation had failed to solve the problem, so the US Congress tried a new approach, a cap and trade program that set a declining limit on pollution and let companies decide how to meet it. Now power plants could profit by reducing pollution, and they responded, engineering new ways to cut sulfur pollution at a fraction of the predicted cost. By 2015, when the program ended, sulfur dioxide emissions had fallen 86% in about 20 years. You don't read about acid rain anymore because the emissions that caused them have been solved. And we saved hundreds of thousands of lives in the process with estimated benefits that were more than 40 times the cost. The US sulfur dioxide cap and trade program provided a model for other countries too. When Europe, the European Union, decided to tackle climate change, it installed a cap and trade program for carbon dioxide and greenhouse gases. California followed in 2013, establishing a cap and trade program that's helped the state become a world leader. In fact, by half a dozen years later, California had attracted 40% of the clean tech investment across the entire country. Now those programs in Europe and California and elsewhere are becoming a model for the world. Over 60 states and countries around the world have an emissions trading program or some other form of carbon price. And those carbon prices are going up, driving up innovation and driving down emissions. There's even a market-based program to limit emissions from international aviation. And there are some new and innovative approaches to leverage voluntary action by companies to address tropical deforestation and to accelerate the clean energy transition in developing countries. So imagine a future where a country's most valuable natural resources aren't oil and gas, but wind and solar, where fortunes are made in biofuels rather than fossil fuels, where businesses profit from taking carbon out of the air and storing it rather than pumping it in. A future where farmers and ranchers make money by storing carbon in the soil, and where tropical forests are worth more alive than dead. That's a world we can build if we harness the power of capitalism, we get the incentives right, and we use capitalism so that it doesn't contribute to climate change, but rather helps to solve it. Thank you.